So, did the NFL just go woke, or did it just go where the numbers are? Because last Sunday, the 8th of February, 2026, the biggest televised ritual in American sports, the Super Bowl, let a Puerto Rican reggaeton superstar turn the field into a sugarcane landscape, throw a barrio house party, and then bless America by reminding the United States that it is not the only country in America. And here's why this hit a nerve. The show landed in a political climate where immigration enforcement is not an abstract debate, but a lived fear, including the very real question: will federal agents turn up at public events? That tension was already in the air because 1 week earlier, at the 2026 Grammys, Bad Bunny opened an acceptance speech with Ice out, criticized dehumanizing language used about immigrants, and argued for basic human dignity that should not really be controversial in a civilization that claims to be Christian. This video is a reaction to the reactions, not just what happened at halftime, but why people lost their minds, and what this reveals about the future of the United States, linguistically, culturally, and yes, spiritually, or ontologically, if you want. Its sort of national being, its essence, right? Because if you zoom out, the Bad Bunny halftime show wasn't merely representation. It was the burial of an old bargain. You can be here, but only if you translate yourself, only if you assimilate. Now, was the show political? Symbolically, yes. But did it do the thing everyone expected? A direct orange man bad monologue from the state? No, no, no. The show ran on joy, memory, and cultural pride, while the surrounding commentary turned it into a live culture war event anyways. That no direct speech detail matters, because last year's halftime show, headlined by Kendrick Lamar, primed audiences for a new round of identity politics and cultural conflict. But 2026 arrived with a totally different weapon: civilizational symbolism that doesn't ask for permission. So, why was he invited? For one, global dominance. Bad Bunny was Spotify's most streamed artist of 2025. Two, historical prestige. His album, Debí Tirar Más Fotos, won Album of the Year at the 2026 Grammys, the first Spanish language album to do so. And finally, market reality. The NFL has run Latino audience initiatives. For example, Por la Cultura, expanded Spanish language reach for years, and carried Super Bowl Spanish broadcasts dating back to 2014. And after the show, the data said the quiet part out loud. This year's Super Bowl averaged about 124.9 million viewers. It peaked around 137.8, 137.9 across platforms. The halftime show averaged 128.2 million viewers. Telemundo hit records. Bad Bunny's show generated 4 billion social media views within 24 hours. Duolingo recorded a 35% spike in Spanish language learners immediately after the show and leaned into it publicly. Which brings us to our thesis. Assimilation is dead. Not because someone wrote an academic paper, but because an imperial-sized corporate ecosystem bet its most valuable cultural stage on Spanish. And the bet paid off. So let's talk about what actually happened. and why it was both groundbreaking and controversial. The show ran about 13 minutes, and it was staged as a moving set of vignettes. Sugarcane fields, everyday scenes of Puerto Rican and diaspora life, the iconic casita, and visual references to the island's power grid crisis. It included cameos and guests, notably Lady Gaga and Ricky Martin, and the broader constellation of celebrity appearances that turned the set into a rolling social register of pop culture. This was the first Super Bowl halftime show performed entirely or almost entirely in Spanish. And Spanish wasn't just used as spice, a feature, or a chorus. Spanish was the operating language of the main event. And here's why that matters for Anglo-American identity. The Super Bowl is not just entertainment. It is a national ritual, a civic liturgy for modern America, complete with symbols of belonging and sacred memory. So when that sacred space runs in Spanish, the message is not merely diversity. The message is this country is changing at the roots, not hypothetically, demographically, and linguistically. The United States is a country where Spanish is the dominant non-English language in homes and is already the world's second largest Spanish-speaking country by population. Now, for the line that launched the Meltdown, Bad Bunny's English portion was brief, and he said, "God bless America." Then proceeded to name countries across North, Central, and South America, reframing America as the hemisphere, as the continent, and not merely the United States. This is where I need to ask with love and a certain wink, right? So people from Asia are called Asians. People from Africa are called Africans. People from Europe, right? They're, I'm pretty sure, called Europeans. So people from America are what? You know, are we getting it? This is hilarious because, you know, it's correct and also exactly what makes people furious. If your nationalism requires bad geography to function, your nationalism is basically like one missed Wikipedia click away from utter collapse. The show wasn't Latino vibes, it was Puerto Rico, placed at the center of the empire's Colosseum. Sugarcane invoked colonial economy and labor. The Jíbaro imagery invoked national identity. The casita declared home and community as the main character. The power poles during El Apagón pointed straight at the electric grid crisis and institutional failure. And Puerto Rico's political status sat underneath the entire performance like background radiation. US citizens without voting representation in presidential elections while living on the island. So when the show waved a light blue Puerto Rican flag, an independence symbol, it wasn't a random aesthetic choice. It was a quiet statement in a loud arena. Puerto Rico's story is a colonial ledger shaped by language, faith, and a stubborn refusal to become a blank slate. And there's a detail many people seem to have missed. A small Spanish flag appeared in the set decoration. This wasn't an accident. It was the bluntest possible reminder of roots that many people would rather treat as optional. So here's the punchline of the whole story. Bad Bunny didn't have to deliver a political lecture because the reaction itself was the lecture. Start with the obvious. Donald Trump publicly called the halftime show one of the worst ever and attacked it partly on the basis that people don't understand a word. Other conservative actors didn't just complain. They tried to They tried to counter-program it. Weren't conservatives supposed to be the facts don't care about your feelings, right? And the sort of anti-safe space crowd, cool, you know, but here's the fact. Bad Bunny is the biggest artist in the world right now, singing only in Spanish and not asking for permission. You care about the free market? Amazing, great. The NFL's multi-million dollar market research machine looked at the numbers and concluded Spanish is the future and Bad Bunny would be a hit. And boy, were they right. The Benito Bowl pulled a record 135 million viewers and turned President Trump's outrage and Turning Point's pathetic safe space trailer park of an alternative show into a public humiliation. If you asked Americans to choose between Bad Bunny and Kid Rock, you didn't save the culture. You signed your own cultural death certificate. What amazes me isn't just how triggered these conservatives get when Spanish dares to echo inside their sacred stadium. It's the hypocrisy. I mean, these are the same people who foam at the mouth for more military interventions in our hemisphere, sanctions, blockades, destabilization, invasions, and then act shocked when the United States gets slowly but surely Hispanicized by millions of migrants from the very countries they help turn into pressure cookers. Influence is always a two-way street. These people still haven't understood the simplest fact. American imperialism is a refugee factory. You don't get neo-colonial plunder without mass migration. You cannot have your cake and eat it too. You can't cheer interventionism and then complain your country is full of migrants. I mean, you can, but you'll just end up collecting Fell For It Again awards. So, you know, choose your poison. The US is either a global empire that sells itself as this morally righteous manager of the rules-based international order, which means accepting partial Hispanization as the price of empire, or it's a sort of mask-off, predatory, colonial white nation setting itself up for war at home and eventual balkanization. I mean, liberal globalism, for better or for worse, is the only thing you have to preserve any sort of WASP hegemony. I mean, the smarter right-wingers are already starting to come to terms with this, which is why they're keeping their distance from the TPUSA Hillbilly Fest. And MAGA thinks they're like anti-woke. They don't even know what anti-woke means because they don't even know what the United States is to universal history. The American Revolution was the first woke temper tantrum, and only Hispanics have the philosophical tools to deal with this. Because only Hispanics are the direct inheritors of a traditional American empire. Anglos are the children of the Reformation, the Enlightenment, Freemasonry, Romanticism, and every modernist degeneracy repackaged as civilization. Most Anglo right wingers wouldn't recognize trad if it hit them in the fucking face. So sure, like go ahead, you know, try to build some like pagan nationalist cosplay. Yeah, like go ahead, like we'll just regroup around Roman Catholic universalism, pull the blacks and the Anglo Catholics on our side, you know, form an alliance with the rest of the hemisphere. Yeah, I don't think you want to go there. So if you're an American Catholic who loves America and wants America's, you know, soul to be saved, aligned with the one true church founded by Jesus Christ, then, you know, allow me to recommend you do what the great Bishop of Chiclayo, Robert Francis Previs, did: learn Spanish. So let's make this easier on everyone. Let's stop pretending like Spanish is like some foreign language. I mean, it's not Korean, Swahili, or Hindu. Spanish was spoken throughout what is now the United States long before English. Spanish explorers arrived in Puerto Rico in 1593, then Florida in 1513. The first European settlement in what's now the US was St. Augustine in 1565. Let me remind you, Thomas Jefferson himself wrote to his nephew Peter Carr in 1787, quote, bestow great attention on Spanish and endeavor to acquire an accurate knowledge of it. Our future connections with Spain and Spanish America will render that language of valuable acquisition. The ancient part of American history is written chiefly in Spanish. I am sending you a dictionary, end quote. So when you celebrate foreigners like the Rolling Stones, Coldplay, or Paul McCartney playing at the Super Bowl halftime show, but then wow, when an American sings in an American language, you're not displaying patriotism. You're displaying a weak, cringe, Anglo-centric parochial anxiety, hardly the posture of an imperial universalist. Because the joke writes itself. When it comes time to invade, bomb, or colonize a Hispanic country, conservatives love to remind us that this is the Americas, our hemisphere, our continent, our backyard. But the second America for the Americans actually becomes America for the Americans, they whine like a little. And to any intelligent foreign observer, it just sounds like Anglo-conservatives have long lost the imperial mandate of heaven. On the Anglo Left, there are two clear positions. The first frames the whole thing through woke multiculturalism. The halftime show becomes a glowing display of the best of America, celebration of diversity, tolerance, and respect. It's presented as a pan-American preview of a post-Trump good neighbor policy, a soft return to post-Cold War liberal consensus. This camp is not naive. I mean, it is imperial. It understands that cultural capital is power. It knows how to cultivate ideological consent among the colonized, how to plant narratives that later produce compliant elites. Petros and Sheinbaum's integrated seamlessly into the circuitry of Soros, degrowth, and liberal globalist hegemony. This is empire with better branding. Then there's the second option, which complements the first by pretending to oppose it. This one drags out the rusted decolonial artillery and reminds us that Spanish is a white colonial language too. It's the classic no sabo cope, rehearsed endlessly inside the CIA color revolution factories, otherwise known as Latin American Studies departments. This ultra-left indigenism stabilizes the Anglo-centric status quo by projecting the Anglo-American colonial experience onto a radically different historical reality. The record is clear. Native languages in the Americas survived not in spite of Spain's missionary work, but precisely because of it. Spanish functioned as the lingua franca of the empire, but it was never declared a single uniform official language in the modern nation-state sense. Indigenous languages were preserved through grammars, dictionaries, catechisms, and administrative usage. Their use was often promoted regionally. It was the post-independence republics, imitating Enlightenment nationalist models, that imposed Spanish as a homogenizing national language and pursued the erasure of linguistic difference. Both English and Spanish are now universal languages. They have long transcended their original national context. Reducing either one to a mere colonial imposition misses the present struggle entirely. It confuses historical origin with current geopolitical function. So while the center-left celebrates pan-American identity, the far-left polices its boundaries, neutralizing the integrative potential of Hispanization and keeping everything safely contained within an Anglo-centric framework. That entire playbook is exhausted. What actually matters, and what's actually interesting, is the post-woke pivot now unfolding. The clearest example is California Governor Gavin Newsom. The Democratic favorite for 2028 publicly declared Super Bowl Sunday Bad Bunny Day in California ahead of the halftime performance in the Bay Area. He did it on X. He praised the Puerto Rican artist and mocked Donald Trump in the process. He even imitated Trump's cadence. As many people know, I am a tremendous lover of the Spanish. It is beautiful language spoken by many beautiful people in the great state of California and across the world. I am also a huge fan of Puerto Rico. Now, okay, I'm not saying we need to start calling him Don Gavin Newsom, Viceroy of the Californias, but the signal is unmistakable. A crude, opportunistic politician who governs the wokest state in the Union referred not to Latinos, not to Latinx, not to BIPOC, but to the Spanish, even if it was delivered with irony. A few years ago, that would have been absolutely unthinkable. Question is, by the Spanish, was he referring to the people or to the language? See, that doubt, that dialectic is where it gets interesting. This is not an accident. Newsom and his communications team understand something liberal and conservative pundits still refuse to process. The United States is already bilingual and bicultural. No amount of culture war theater changes that. The central friction of American identity in the 21st century is not left versus right, Republican, Democrat, progressive, conservative. It is what Samuel Huntington called decades ago the Hispanic Question. Newsom knows that, Trump knows that. They differ only in how they manage it. Electorally, the math is quite simple, actually. Hispanics demonstrated political independence in 2024. They are no longer enslaved by the Democrat plantation. They are not owned by either party. They hold the keys to California, Texas, and Florida, the three largest states in the country, along with New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, Colorado, and parts of New York. The US electoral system, for better or for worse, has structurally elevated Hispanic voters into kingmakers within the imperial core. Hispanic support for Trump in 2024 shattered the myth of automatic Democratic loyalty. That moment marks the beginning of a new era. Hispanic political capital will never again be taken for granted. It will be negotiated. It will be leveraged. This is about numbers in the strategic centers of empire. Apply that to culture, apply that to commerce, apply that to media. We are no longer in the era of soft assimilation and token identity politics where J-Lo, Enrique Iglesias, Ricky Martin, or Pitbull would sprinkle a little Spanish sauce, a little Spanish flavor while ultimately pandering to the Anglo consumer. No, that era it's over. This is the Bad Bunny century. Now, the Anglo establishment must pander to Hispanics. It must honor Spanish. It must engage with Hispanic culture on its own linguistic and symbolic terms. And it will, because the numbers demand it. More on that later. Now, let's deal with the Hispanic reactions. Among Hispanic conservatives, whether operating inside the Anglo-liberal political arena like Maria Elvira Salazar, or within the more traditional Catholic Hispanista circles, the line is consistent. Bad Bunny does not represent the best of our culture. Okay, that instinct is understandable, but it is strategically myopic. This was a win. And treating it like a loss because it doesn't fit a moral aesthetic ideal is self-defeating purity fetishism. Yes, reggaeton is degenerate, but so is most popular music of the last 50 years. We live inside a hypersexualized capitalist spectacle that commodifies vice. We know this. Stating the obvious does nothing. It contributes nothing. It changes nothing. What's missing here is a certain political realism. Hispanidad is not a museum artifact. It is not an endangered species that needs to be placed behind the glass and protected from contamination. It is alive. And if you treat it like fragile porcelain, you end up staging your own version of the TPUSA Kid Rock embarrassment. Culturally sterile, aesthetically lifeless, and strategically irrelevant. There are two possibilities here. Either some Hispanic conservatives are trying to fit into the mainstream Anglo-conservative establishment, or they are retreating into a self-ghettoized essentialism that imagines culture as static and pure. Neither approach survives contact with reality. There's a strong traditionalist critique that says when Spain arrived, it brought faith, institutions, knowledge, and civilizational coherence, whereas Anglo-American cultural export today pushes commodified sexual excess, narco-aesthetics, and glamorized violence. That critique has some force. It names something real, but it is historically frozen and politically unusable. We operate in the world as it exists today, as it exists now. Mestizaje goes both ways. Cultural exchange is reciprocal. Without Anglo influence, there is no Messi, no Maradona, no Shakira, no Soda Stereo, no Salsa, no Borges, no Guillermo del Toro, no Celia Cruz, no Santana, no Julio Cesar Chavez. No serious Hispanic would take a deal that erased that entire layer of history. The flow has never been one directional. What is happening is not only the imposition of Anglo-American gangster culture onto like innocent, victimized Hispanics. It is simultaneously the Hispanization of the United States. Yes, Bad Bunny uses the term Latino. That is a conceptual error. We'll get to that. But that does not negate the larger fact. Singing entirely in Spanish at the Super Bowl is objectively positive for Hispanic unity. Duolingo recorded a 35% increase in Spanish learners immediately after the concert. That is measurable cultural impact. I can't understand what he's saying. I mean, that complaint collapses under its own weight. Hispanidad celebrates dialectical diversity. Caribbean cadence is not a defect, it is vitality. The deeper issue is fantasy. Many people say they want Hispanidad, but what they actually want is a sanitized, moralized, frozen version of it. Some wholesome Chungus Arcadia that never fully existed. I mean, Columbus was arrested by the crown and Cortés famously cheated on his wife. They were not some perfect caricature of gallantry and nobility that some people would have you believe. But when living, breathing Hispanidad appears in front of them, commercial, urban, flawed, global, they recoil because it doesn't match the fantasy in their heads. Bad Bunny is the closest thing to a mainstream advocate of Hispanidad operating at a global scale right now. He speaks Spanish unapologetically. He centers Puerto Rico. He affirms hemispheric identity. He integrates Spain into the symbolic universe of the show, wearing Sara, showing El Morro, allowing the Spanish flag to appear, referencing Barcelona, renaming the event Super Tazón. He increasingly uses his full Spanish name, Benito Antonio Martínez Ocasio, and avoids anglicizing the spectacle. That is not trivial. That is narrative control. At the 10th Congress of the Spanish language in Arequipa, organized by the Instituto Cervantes, he was honored as the artist who most champions the Spanish language worldwide. Institutions that measure linguistic impact recognize what is happening. Puerto Rico was supposed to be deracinated, the way Hawaii and the Philippines were. It wasn't. It preserved its Hispanic essence. It invented salsa in the heart of the empire. It exported reggaeton globally. It produced a figure who stood in the Roman Colosseum of the Super Bowl and did not switch languages, did not dilute the message, and did not beg for translation. That refusal is not accidental. Puerto Ricans have never ceded quietly. A small island that could have vanished from geopolitical relevance has dominated global music for a century. Youth from Mexico to Miami, from Patagonia to the peninsula, and even beyond the Hispanic world, imitate Puerto Rican rhythm and slang. That is cultural conquest. That is the spirit of Quijote. fighting even when others call you delusional, refusing to bow, refusing to translate, refusing to disappear. This is a win, strategically, symbolically, and culturally. Now, on the financing controversies. So there are complaints that Bad Bunny's rise was financially backed by Rafael Ricardo Jimenez Dan, a former Venezuelan military officer and vice minister under President Hugo Chavez, linking Bad Bunny's breakthrough to financing connected with the Bolivarian regime. Ooh. Now, wait a second. Do you have any idea how fucking cool that makes Chavez look? So you're telling me a globally sanctioned pariah state was able to get their guy to perform at the most watched event in the heart of the empire? Based. And none of that changes the central fact. Spanish dominated the Super Bowl stage. Puerto Rico refused to translate, and Hispanidad did not apologize. And finally, the Hispanic left. There's a whole segment of Hispanic leftists, self-described as Latino, complaining that the United States manipulates and defines what it means to be Latino. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Of course it does. It has been doing that since the fall of the Spanish Empire. The Latino culture they imagine in their heads is already a product of imperial manipulation. It is the Monroe Doctrine's identity theft. Latino is a category engineered to sever you from the very thing that connects you across the continent beyond petty nationalism, the Hispanic element, the Spanish language, the Catholic inheritance, and centuries of political and institutional unity. Some people, they sense this. So they retreat into a semantic escape hatch, right? Latino is not the same as Latinoamericano. But that maneuver collapses under scrutiny because the term itself is foreign in its modern political usage. Latino America was coined in the 19th century by the French in the 1850s as part of the ideological justification for intervention in the Second Mexican Empire. The banner of Latin civilization was not invented to celebrate Roman heritage. It was crafted to align the Spanish-American world with French geopolitical ambition under Napoleon III. It was an imperial category dressed up as solidarity. Etymologically, the word Latino originally referred to the Latini, the inhabitants of Latium, the region around Rome. In that strict linguistic sense, it refers to all the speakers of Romance languages: Spaniards, Portuguese, French, Italians, Romanians, Catalans, even Creole speakers who inherited fragments of Latin's expansion. In that historical frame, Latinidad is not racial. It is not continental. It is a linguistic continuity born of Rome's civilizational spread from the Mediterranean to the New World. But etymological purity doesn't redeem modern political deployment. Latinoamerica was not constructed as a neutral descriptor. It functioned as a strategic reframing, a way to dilute the Iberian axis that bound the Spanish-American world together while pretending to elevate a broader Latin unity. It replaced a concrete civilizational inheritance with a vaguer, more malleable abstraction. That fiction crossed the Atlantic and evolved. The United States absorbed Latino into its own bureaucratic and consumer vocabulary. It was repackaged as a demographic category, a manageable identity block. Under that lens, descendants of Spanish America could be acknowledged, but detached from Spain, from Catholic continuity, and from imperial history. The Latino became a North American construction, stripped of Indo-Hispanic depth and converted into like a little folkloric and deracinated label. Today, honestly, little more than an exoticized graphic category for the Anglo consumer. Let's be honest. That is why contemporary discussions of Latino identity often feel hollow. suspended between languages, unmoored from historical memory. The category is broad enough to include, vague enough to control. It gestures towards shared civilization while severing it from the Iberian source that gave it philosophical coherence and spiritual gravity. Expecting a reggaeton artist to unpack all of that is obviously unrealistic. That level of historical and civilizational analysis is far beyond the job description of pop music. Yet, Bad Bunny, despite using the term Latino through cultural inertia, consistently affirms the Spanish legacy of Puerto Rico. He does not erase it. He does not apologize for it. In that sense, he outmaneuvers large segments of the Hispanic left who remain trapped in a perpetual Black legend mindset, internalizing narratives of self-hatred and erasure. The larger point is this: criticizing American commodification of Hispanic culture is legitimate. It is real. But if you do that without confronting the deeper identity substitution that Latinidad represents in its modern usage, you end up sounding very confused and ultimately reduced to political incompetence, as we see with the Latino Americanist left today. If you want intellectual coherence, you start at the root. You address the historical reframing itself. Otherwise, you are fighting the symptoms while defending the framework that produced them. So it's time to understand what is actually at stake. The culture war is not fundamentally about left versus right, progressive versus conservative. It never was. The culture war today is what it has been since the term first entered political vocabulary. The original Kulturkampf of German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck was not a meme or a cable news shouting match. It was a structural and existential conflict between the modern Protestant state and Latin Rome. In Europe, it looked like Martin Luther versus San Ignacio de Loyola. In the New World, it translated into New England versus New Spain. Two civilizational lineages, two moral imaginations, two ways of organizing authority, faith, language, and political life. Secularism, multiculturalism, and liberalism did not resolve that clash. They merely obscured it. They papered over it with administrative languages and consumer comfort. But concealment is not resolution. When empires enter crisis, as ours clearly has, buried tensions resurface. Identity anxieties flare up. Old fault lines become visible again. Listen closely when figures like Megyn Kelly or Matt Walsh speak about the Spanish language. I remind you, an American language. What emerges is not policy debate. It is civilizational unease, an instinctive reaction that suggests the conflict runs deeper than voter blocks or immigration quotas. But here's the paradox. Both sides need us. You see, the left needs Hispanics to sustain the narrative that America is a tolerant melting pot. Without us, the diversity thesis collapses into abstraction. The right needs Hispanics for entirely different reasons: family values, religious commitment, and masculine macho vitality. Both camps recognize, implicitly or explicitly, that the Anglo heritage core can no longer sustain itself alone. The LARP is over. We are living in a post-woke moment defined by escalating intra-Anglo polarization. In that environment, Hispanics are emerging as a decisive center of gravity, a common sense bloc capable of tipping elections and reshaping political coalitions. And the reason is simple. Hispanic identity does not fit neatly into the ideological binaries that dominate the discourse of Anglo-Protestant capitalist modernity. We are conservative, but not race-obsessed, sensual, but not degenerate, Catholic, but not intolerant, entrepreneurial, but not rapacious, revolutionary, but not nihilistic, traditional, without being reactionary. I mean, that combination confuses both sides because it cannot be reduced to their categories. The reality is structural. The demographic shift is irreversible. The linguistic shift is measurable, and the cultural shift is clearly visible. Hispanics are not a subculture inside the American project. We are becoming one of its defining pillars. In other words, we are not a footnote in the future of America. We are the future of America. And as a last comment, thank you so much for your support. The comments on the last video have been amazing and heartwarming and overwhelmingly positive. I'm glad, incredibly glad to see that there is an audience for this in English, because essentially what we're trying to do here is translate ideas, concepts, stories, theories that already exist in Spanish and have existed for many, many, many years, but have not, no han dado el brinco, right? They haven't reached, Hispanic Americans. They haven't reached Pochos. They haven't reached Chicanos. They haven't reached, Anglo Catholics who might be interested in this. They haven't reached the center of empire, right? So if you enjoyed, please, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, send it to your friends, family, lovers, comrades, compatriots, right? And yeah, stay tuned for the next video.